All right, so this week in lab, we are going to do the lab ID of identification of household compounds. That is page 41 of your lab notebook. And the procedure that we're going to do is I'm going to talk you through sort of the background lecture, which is what we're doing here. And then you'll go and watch Dr. Dang perform those experiments in two videos that will be in the Canvas module for this week, and fill out your lab notebook with the observations you make in those videos. All right, so the key for this particular lab is that as a chemist, we want to make careful observations of chemical reactions. So in this lab, we're going to mix chemicals together and we're going to see various different chemical reactions that occur, and we're going to observe what are those differences. And we want to make detailed observations about what we see. And that way, if we want to repeat the experiment, or if somebody else does a similar experiment, they can relate what we did to what they did. And if we get a solution that turns a certain color, say it turns pink, they do a solution that turns pink, then we can relate those two different experiments to each other. So that's what we're going to do. Our key today is going to be making careful observations of what we see. So what we're going to be looking at is a variety of household compounds. Okay, so this is on page 42 of your lab manual. And these household compounds are very common things. We have table salt, baking soda, Tums, Epsom salts, fertilizer or Miracle-Gro, and a detergent. Okay, and you'll notice for our chemical formulas for each of these things, these compounds are the things that we've been talking about recently, which are ionic compounds. So in other words, they are formed from ions. So in each of these compounds, we have a cation and we have an anion. All right, so what we're going to do today is a variety of experiments that will allow us to identify the different ions that we have in an unknown solution. So we're going to identify cations, things, metals that we see, metals and NH4, and we're going to identify anions, so chloride and carbonate, sulfate, phosphate. So for this lab, you should have already read or watched the videos about polyatomics, so you should know about those things. So I won't be discussing those here, but if not, you want to stop it, go back, watch, learn about those, and then move on from there. So for this lab, what we're going to do is we have specific tests that will show us if we have the presence of specific ions in our solution. So we're going to have a test for sodium, test for calcium, test for potassium. All of these cations will have their own unique test that will give us a result that says, yes, this particular ion is part of the solution that we have. And there are also tests for anions. So we've got tests for chloride, sulfate, phosphate, carbonate. And this one we haven't talked about, which is hydrogen carbonate. It's similar to carbonate, only it has a hydrogen in front of it. Okay, so we're going to do tests for all of these different things in our solution. And what we're going to do is we're going to take an unknown and we're going to do the same tests on the unknown, and we're going to see which of the tests have a similar response to a test that we have. We know that there is one of those ions in the solution. And by doing that, we'll rule out, okay, it's not sodium, it's not calcium, maybe it's potassium. And then we'll look at tests of our anion, and maybe we'll do a bunch of tests and we get that our anion is chloride. So the compound that we have, the unknown compound, we've been able to determine that it is potassium chloride. Okay, so we're going to do these variety in this series of tests for figuring out what is this unknown, and the unknown that we're looking for is going to be one of these household compounds. So one of these 6 that we see on the list is the unknown that we're looking at, and we're going to try to do some investigation to figure out which of those unknowns is it. And for all of these particular compounds, or nearly all of them, if you were to look at them in the lab as a solid, what most of these things look like is a white solid. So if you think about sodium chloride, table salt, it's just a white solid. Baking soda may look a little different than sodium chloride, but it's still a white solid. Tums, if you just looked at the calcium carbonate part, it's a white solid. So the fact that it's a white solid you can't identify things very well from the fact that it's just some white solid, right? So we can dissolve these solids into water. So you can take sodium chloride, you can put it into water and stir it up, and it will dissolve. And what you get is a clear, colorless solution, which is salt water. But again, if we do that with sodium chloride, we get something that's clear and colorless. If we do that with baking soda, eventually we stir it up, we get a solution that's clear and colorless. So all of these things really are going to give us a clear colorless, well, not all of them, many of them are going to give us a clear colorless solution. So it's not a very good way of identifying what is in our substance. So what we're going to do is we're going to do those tests for each of the ions that are part of that substance to be able to specify what the ions are that we have in that particular compound. So if you recall, when we did the separation of a mixture experiment, we had a solution that had sodium chloride in it, NaCl, and it was in water. So we had basically salt water. That was the bay water. And we knew that when we added AgNO3 to that solution, what did we get? We got a white solid precipitate formed. So if we mix sodium chloride plus AgNO3, we get a white precipitate. So that's a very well-known reaction. So I know that if I have anything that has chloride ion in it, and I add silver nitrate to it, I'm going to get a solid white precipitate. So that right there gives me a way of testing for if something has sodium chloride in it. We took pure water, added silver nitrate to it, and there was no reaction. But as soon as we had sodium chloride in there, we get this white precipitate. So that's a test for the chloride ion. All right, so we can do that for all of these different ions. There's various tests that you're going to do, but one of the tests for the chloride ion specifically is going to be adding silver nitrate and seeing if we get a white precipitate. And if we do, then we know our sample has the chloride ion in it. So if we were to do that same test, so we take silver nitrate and we add it to a solution that contains other ions or another ion. So say we have calcium carbonate and we add silver nitrate to that, that's going to give us a different reaction. So we're not going to see necessarily a white cloudy solution. It may change color, or it may give off bubbles or do something different. But we know that when we're looking for chloride, we can add silver nitrate to make sure if we have chloride in that solution. If we have something else, then we're going to see something different. So instead of testing those other things with silver nitrate, we'll do a series of other tests to test for those. So for each of these things on our list, we'll have a specific test that only finds that particular ion in the solution. And then we can specify, yes, I have that particular ion in my unknown. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to compare the chemical reactions between a known compound, so something that we know has a particular ion in it, to an unknown compound. So, like I said, we're going to do, let's take a look at the chloride test in specifically. So if we have, we're going to take in our sample, we're going to take, where is it? Chemical test for the chloride ion. We're going to take the sample of sodium chloride and add AgNO3, and then we're going to make an observation of what it does. So we know when we add AgNO3, the one on the left side, this is the known, and the one on the right side is unknown. So we add silver nitrate to sodium chloride, and we get a white precipitate. So we would write in here, the result of that test was a white precipitate. So we know that when we add something that has chloride in it, it gives us a white precipitate. And then we're going to take the unknown sample that we don't know. We don't know whether it has chloride ion in it or not. So we'll take that unknown and we're going to add silver nitrate to it. And then we see from those results, if we get no precipitate or we get something different, then we know that the chloride ion, which would give us a white precipitate, is not in our unknown solution. So let's say it's got something else. And in our unknown solution, we get no reaction. Okay, so then we can say the unknown does not contain chloride. All right. So then we're going to move on to our next thing that we're going to do. We're going to look at the sulfate ion, and we'll do a similar test. We're going to take a known compound that we know has sulfate in it. We're going to do a reaction with it, and we're going to see what happens. Let's say when we have sulfide in it, I think the solution, what we do to it, the solution turns blue. I'm not sure of this, but I think it turns blue. Okay, so now we know we have what's called a positive test. So we know that it has SO4, and when it has SO4, it's going to do this specific thing. And we say that's a positive test. And then we test our unknown. And if that unknown does the exact same thing that the known does, changes the color, gives off bubbles, forms a precipitate, if it does the exact same thing, then we know that that particular solution contains the sulfate ion. Okay, so in this case, if it had the sulfate ion, it's going to turn blue. Okay, so we're comparing known to unknown to specify whether we have these different ions. So like I said, your unknown is going to be one of these guys. So we're going to be able to rule out all but one anion and all but one cation, and the final compound, the unknown that we have, we can say, okay, that unknown contains this and this, therefore this is the identity of it. It's, say, baking soda, and it has this chemical formula. All right, so the first thing that you'll see on the video, we're going to start out with part B. So these guys you don't need to worry about the physical appearance and the unknown. Actually, the unknown number, I'm going to just write it out for you here because we're only going to do one unknown. That's going to be unknown B. And the physical appearance is a white solid. So those are the two things we know about our unknown, some white solid. Okay. The first tests we're going to do are tests for cations. All right, so we're going to go through and we're going to try to figure out on our list, we're going to try to figure out which of these cations do I have in my unknown solution? All right, so when we do tests for cations, a very common test for it, and this is the first video in the two that we have to watch. When you do tests for cations, a common test is the flame test. So different cations will give different colors of flame in a Bunsen burner. So the Bunsen burner is blue when it burns, looks just like natural gas like you would have at home because it is natural gas. And when you put a compound that has a particular a cation in it, like potassium, it's going to change the color of the flame. So you're going to see different colors depending on whether it has potassium, whether it has calcium, or whether it has sodium. So the first part of the test is observing what is the color of that flame when you burn it. So, and one of the problems that we run into with this particular test is the sodium ion tends to be around kind of in everything. Just a moment. All right, so what I was talking about before my dog, you're probably going to hear my dog here. So one of the problems that we have is sodium ion tends to be around in a lot of different places. So it gets on surfaces of things because there's a lot of sodium around. So you'll see when you burn a Bunsen burner, sometimes the flame has little bits of orange in it. And those orange is from the sodium ion burning, okay? So you'll see when you see Dr. Dang do this, you'll see that she has every now and then there's a little spark of orange in the blue flame, and that's from the sodium ion. But when she puts the sodium ion itself from a solution of sodium chloride, you'll see it burns a bright orange flame. So because of that, what we're going to do is we're going to take what's called a cobalt blue glass. You've seen these nice blue colored glass. And we're going to look through that. Usually you look through it with your eye. We're going to put it on the camera lens. And what that does is it takes away the color of the sodium contamination that's kind of all around. So that allows you to see other colors that are in the flame without seeing that sodium color. So you're going to look at a solution of potassium chloride, a solution of calcium chloride, and a solution of sodium chloride. And you'll observe the colors of the three different flames, and then you're going to do the three different flames with the cobalt blue glass and observe the colors that you see with those, okay? And then you're going to take the unknown solution, or Dr. Dang is going to take the unknown solution, so this is going to be unknown B, and you're going to observe, does that have a specific color that was similar to the colors that you saw here, and then what was the color through the blue glass? So this is a test for these three different ions, okay? So if it's one of these three ions, hopefully it will show a similar color here. If it's not one of these three ions, then you may see a different result. So that's what you're going to do in this particular part of the test. Okay, moving on to the second page where we're still looking at tests for cations. And for the next test, and this one I'm going to use just to illustrate how we are going to do all the rest of the test. I won't go through every test specifically. So for the second test, we're going to test for the calcium ion. So we're testing for the calcium 2+ ion. So if you'll notice on the flame test, we also did calcium 2+. This one is a little more, gives us a little better idea of calcium ion in our solution. Okay, so we have a specific test for the calcium 2+ ion. So in your observations that you're going to make, you're going to put your observations in these boxes here about what you see when the reaction occurs. Okay, so on the left-hand side, this is going to be the known. So this is our known. So we're going to start with a solution that we know has calcium ion in it, calcium 2+ ion in it. And we're going to do a test. And this particular test uses this compound, which is ammonium oxalate. So when I mix ammonium oxalate with anything that has a calcium 2 plus ion, I'm going to get a specific reaction. So you're going to write those results. What do you see? So what you observe. Okay, that is your known. So you know, okay, when I mix calcium with this chemical, this is what happens. Then you're going to take the unknown. You're going to watch Dr. Deng take the unknown. She's going to do the exact same thing, only she's going to mix this solution with the unknown. And what the question is, does it react the same way as the known, or does it do something different? So if it reacts the same way as the known, then you would say down here that it's a positive test. That means I have that specific ion. And if it does something that's different than the known does, then that's a negative test, meaning I don't have that specific ion. So you're going to do this for each one of your different ions. You're going to do these tests. You're going to say, is that a positive test or a negative test? And in the end, what you should have is you should have positive tests for one cation, one of these, and a positive test for one of the anion. Then you know what your compound is composed of, because it's going to be composed of one type of cation, one type of anion. So what I'm going to be looking for in your lab reports is good observations about what you see. So when you watch the videos, you want to pause the video and take a look at what you see and give me some good observations about it. If you see it change to, if you see a precipitate form, if you see it change color, I want some details about what you see. And I want more than one word answers. So if you see something, say it forms a solid, I want to know what color solid did it form. So give me more than just one word observations. Sometimes I get things like blue. That doesn't tell me enough. I want to know did the solution turn blue? Was there solid in there? Is it blue and cloudy? I want good observations. That's what I'm going to be looking for in this particular lab. So we're going to start making those types of observations. Now, when we move on to our next chemical test, just to give you an idea, we're going to test for the ammonium ion, NH4+. Okay, so we're going to do something that we know contains NH4+. That's going to go down this side. And we're going to do something with the unknown and see if it does the same reaction. Now, if you've got these two different steps, you're going to do two different things. If it's going to be positive for this particular, if the test is positive for your unknown for this ion, okay, it should do exactly the same thing. So the first step, maybe it does something the same, okay? And then you take a second step and it does something different. So these two tests have to do the same thing for it to be a positive test. If one of them is different, then you have a different ion in there. That you have something different. You don't have this particular ion. So be looking for that. You'll do one step, then you'll do a second step to confirm it. For this particular experiment, for the ammonium one, you're not going to be able to smell it, of course. So you can just cross out this particular one. So for this guy, you can just X that guy out because we won't have an odor present. The second thing I'm going to be looking for every one of these tests is the test positive or is the test negative? You'll see that on all these tests. The calcium to ion test is positive, negative for the unknown. I want you to circle the correct one. Okay, so when you see a positive test, you circle that. When you see a negative test, you circle that. Because I'm going to look through and I'm going to see positive, negative, and compare it to your observations to make sure that it indeed was either positive or negative. And don't get thrown off by the terminology that we say positive test or negative test. We're not talking about whether the ion is positive or the ion is negative. the test is positive. So positive test did the same thing for the known and the unknown. Negative test did a different thing for the known and the unknown. So it has nothing to do with the charge of the ion. All right, once you've completed all of the tests, you should have results that has, again, you're going to have one positive test for the cation, one positive test for the anion. So your unknown sample, like I said, is going to be B. So we're just doing unknown B. So then you want to specify what is the symbol of the cation with its charge, the symbol of the anion with its charge. Name those anions the way we name them, or excuse me, those ions, the way we name them, cation and anion. Then you want to put the formula together so that the cation and the anion balance the charges. Okay, and I'll give you a hint that where I've already told you that it's going to be one of those household chemicals. So you'll see the list of those things. And then the name of that compound and what the common household name of that particular compound is. So that's going to be what, okay, you've discovered by doing all these tests, this is what my unknown is composed out of. Okay. You can ignore these two questions. Does the physical appearance make sense to you now? So you can just cross those out. Do you think you can identify the compound just by its physical appearance? No, I've already talked about that. A lot of these are white solids, and when you dissolve them, they turn into clear, colorless solutions. Okay, so you can ignore those two. You don't have to answer those two. But I do want to see all this filled out. And then I want you to answer the questions, of course, and that you can do at home after you've watched. What I say that, yeah. You'll do that later on. It won't be due until next week when you can turn that into Gradescope. All right, then a couple of other hints about the questions. In this lab, you won't see it, or you won't be because you're not doing the experiment, but in this lab, we always use deionized water for all of our experiments. Remember deionized water, from the first week we talked about there's a spigot in the lab that gives water. It's very clean water. And why is it so clean? Because it's been deionized. So what it means is that water has had all the ions removed from that. So you always use that deionized water when you do chemical experiments. So you want to answer this question: why would we use deionized water? What is the reason that we use that? Okay, let's see. All right, so for question 3, think about, you've got two unlabeled samples. One is KCl and one is calcium, KCl being potassium chloride, and one is calcium chloride. How can you tell which sample is potassium chloride? So notice that both of these samples contain chloride, right? So that should give you a hint. Now don't be thrown off by the fact that you've got Cl and this one's got Cl2. That just means that there are 2 chloride ions for every 1 calcium. So it still contains the same species, chloride, in both of these guys. Okay, so think about that when you answer that particular question. All right. Okay, and then for number 5, a little hint on that. It's you've burned sodium chloride and calcium chloride. How do you know the color of the flame comes from the sodium ion or the calcium ion and not the chloride? So think about what is in both of those samples, kind of similar to this question. And think about if you saw a different color of flame. So if that was true, go with that. So that's your hint for that particular question. So think about that when you're answering that question. And that should get you through the entire experiment. So again, you're going to listen to this video, take notes, and then you're going to watch this lecture. Then you're going to watch the videos. They're both about 10 minutes long. The first video is for the cation portion of the experiment. The second video is for the anion portion of the experiment. And when you do those experiments, what I'm looking for in this lab is that these boxes are filled out with some good observations. Okay, more than one word observations about what you see in the different reactions that occur. You've got positive and negative indicated for each of the tests. And then in the end, you're telling me what the compound is that the unknown compound was. Okay, so good luck with this lab. And that will do for this lecture.